The rain poured down mercilessly on that deserted road. In the dim glow of the headlights, a shadow lay motionless on the roadside, barely visible in the storm. Cars sped past, their tires splashing through puddles. But no one stopped. No one saw the desperate figure curled in the mud. Or maybe they did see and chose to ignore it. There, on the edge of the road, a German shepherd lay paralyzed, soaked to the bone, his lifeless eyes staring into nothing. He had given up. He was waiting for what, he didn't know. Until, out of nowhere, a car pulled over. What happened next was beyond belief. Get ready for a story of pain, resilience, and an unbelievable miracle. The night was merciless. The rain crashed down in relentless waves, drowning out every sound except the occasional roar of a passing car. The highway was nearly deserted, the headlights of distant vehicles cutting through the darkness like fleeting ghosts. On the side of the road, half submerged in a growing puddle, a German shepherd lay motionless. His thin body was covered in mud, his fur matted and soaked, clinging tightly to his emaciated frame. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't resting. He was waiting. Waiting for help. Waiting for the pain to stop. Or maybe waiting for the end. His name had once been Chance, though no one had spoken it in a long time. His ribs jutted out beneath his thin coat. His legs splayed unnaturally as if his body had simply given up. His breathing was shallow, and his lifeless, unfocused eyes stared ahead, barely registering the cars that sped past him, splashing cold water onto his already trembling body. No one stopped. Some drivers noticed him, a dark shape against the dull glow of the wet asphalt. But they looked away, convincing themselves he was already dead. A lifeless, broken thing left to disappear into the storm. And perhaps they were right. Chance no longer had the strength to move. The cold seeped into his bones, his body numb and unresponsive. His legs wouldn't obey. He had tried to lift his head earlier, but it had taken too much out of him. Now, he just lay there, blinking sluggishly, his vision swimming between the darkness of the road and the occasional flash of bright headlights. The wind howled through the trees, rattling distant road signs. The rain pounded harder, pooling around his body, but he barely felt it anymore. Then, for the first time in hours, light approached, and it slowed down. A vehicle pulled onto the shoulder, its tires splashing against the waterlogged road. A car had finally stopped. Through the haze of exhaustion, Chance barely registered the door slamming shut, followed by hurried footsteps approaching. He should have flinched, should have felt something, anything, but he was past the point of fear. A voice, soft, urgent, broke through the noise of the storm. "Oh my God!" A blurry figure knelt beside him, a warm hand pressing gently against his damp fur. The touch wasn't rough or hurried like the ones from his past. It was careful, concerned. The first kindness he had felt in a long time. The woman's hands trembled as she reached for him. "Can you hear me, buddy?" Her voice was tight, thick with emotion. "Please, don't give up." Chance's ears twitched slightly at the sound, but that was all he could manage. His body was shutting down. The woman refused to accept that. Her green eyes darted toward the passing cars, rain dripping from her soaked dark brown hair. She looked back at him, her breath hitching as she took in his frail, unmoving form. She wasn't going to leave him. Then, with a deep breath, she made her decision. She reached down and lifted him, her arms wrapped carefully around his thin body, ignoring the rain, ignoring the mud, ignoring the fact that he was limp in her grasp. She held him close, shielding him from the storm as best as she could, cradling his fragile frame like something precious, and then she carried him toward the car. Chance didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. The car door slammed shut, muffling the sound of the relentless rain outside. The inside of the vehicle was warm, a stark contrast to the freezing storm raging beyond the windows. Samantha Hayes' hands were shaking, whether from the cold or from emotion, she wasn't sure. Her soaked raincoat clung to her, her dark brown hair dripping onto the seat. As she turned to the passenger side, Chance lay motionless on a towel she had hastily thrown over the seat. His thin frame barely seemed to take up space, his ribs pressing against his dull, wet fur. His breathing was slow, uneven, his body unresponsive even as she carefully tucked another dry towel around him. Samantha swallowed hard. He was barely hanging on. She had seen dogs in bad shape before. She was a veterinarian, after all. But this was different. This dog had been left to die, and no one had stopped. No one had cared. Until now. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, carefully running her fingers over his matted fur. He didn't react. Didn't flinch. He was too weak even to be afraid. Samantha bit the inside of her cheek to keep herself from getting overwhelmed. She had to move. With one last glance at the helpless shepherd beside her, she threw the car into drive. The roads were slick, the windshield wipers working overtime to fight against the storm. Samantha gripped the wheel tightly, her foot pressing a little harder on the gas. The veterinary clinic was still 20 minutes away. 20 minutes she wasn't sure he had. She stole a glance at him. Chance wasn't moving. Her fingers clenched around the steering wheel. "Stay with me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Just a little longer." The rhythmic sound of the rain against the car filled the silence. The storm wasn't letting up, and neither was the weight in her chest. Who had done this to him? Had he been abandoned there? Or had he wandered too far from home and been forgotten? She exhaled sharply. No dog got this sick overnight. This wasn't an accident. Her jaw clenched as she thought about the people who had left him like this. So broken, so lifeless that he had just laid there in the rain, waiting to die. Not anymore. She pressed the gas pedal a little harder. By the time Samantha pulled into the small emergency veterinary clinic, her hands were white-knuckled against the wheel. She barely shifted the car into park before she was unbuckling her seatbelt. She threw the door open, rain pelting against her as she hurried to the passenger side. Chance hadn't moved. Her heart pounded as she carefully scooped his limp body back into her arms. He was just as cold as before, his fur still damp and clinging to his frail body. But his breathing was there. That was all she needed. She kicked the door shut and rushed inside. The warm, sterile air of the clinic hit her instantly, the smell of antiseptic and fresh linens filling her lungs. The front desk was empty, but she barely had time to register it before a voice called out, "Samantha?" A man in a white coat stepped out from the back room, eyebrows raised in confusion. "Derek, I need you, now." Samantha's voice wasn't a request. It was an order. Dr. Derek Whitman, a tall man in his 40s with graying black hair and tired brown eyes, immediately moved toward her. His gaze fell on the shepherd in her arms, and in an instant, his expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. "What happened?" he asked, already reaching for a clean towel. "Found him on the highway. Paralyzed, hypothermic, malnourished, barely breathing." Her words came out quickly, her arms tightening around the dog. Derek's jaw set. "Bring him in." Without hesitation, Samantha hurried after him, cradling Chance's fragile body as she stepped into the treatment room. She didn't know what the night would bring, but one thing was certain. She wasn't giving up on him. The bread examination room was a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, illuminating the sterile white walls and medical equipment neatly arranged on the countertops. Chance lay motionless on the examination table. His frail body barely made an imprint on the clean white sheet beneath him. His fur, still damp from the rain, clung to his thin frame, making the sharp angles of his ribs and hips even more pronounced. His eyes were half closed, glassy, as if he were drifting somewhere far away. He wasn't just weak. He was on the brink. Samantha stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to keep herself together. She had seen bad cases before, but this one was different. This wasn't just neglect. This was deliberate abandonment. Derek, now wearing gloves, moved quickly, assessing the shepherd's condition. He pressed his stethoscope against the dog's chest, listening intently. His expression remained unreadable as he moved to check his reflexes, gently lifting one of Chance's limp legs. Samantha felt her pulse hammering in her ears. "How bad is it?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek exhaled sharply, removing his stethoscope. "Severe malnutrition, hypothermia. His muscles are completely atrophied. He hasn't been walking for a while, maybe weeks." And that's not the worst part. Samantha's stomach clenched. What do you mean? Derek carefully ran his fingers down the dog's spine, pressing lightly. Chance didn't react. No flinch, no whimper, nothing. He has nerve damage. Derek sighed, rubbing his temple. It's either from trauma or prolonged starvation. Could be both. He's completely unresponsive in his hind legs. Samantha's throat tightened. Paralyzed. The word hung in the air between them like an unspoken truth. He might never walk again. Derek continued, his voice softer now. And that's assuming he makes it through the night. Samantha inhaled sharply, blinking against the burning in her eyes. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. She stepped closer, reaching out to gently stroke the shepherd's head. His fur was coarse, brittle under her fingers. His breathing was shallow, but steady. IV fluids, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Pain meds, a heating pad, whatever we can do. Derek hesitated. Sam, you know as well as I do. I know. She cut him off before he could finish. But I won't let him die without a fight. Derek studied her for a long moment before nodding. Without another word, he moved to prepare the IV. The next few hours were a blur of movement and quiet tension. Chance didn't move. As the IV fluid slowly dripped into his body, as Samantha wrapped him in warm blankets, as the storm continued to howl outside, he remained still, his body trapped in a fragile in-between. Samantha sat beside him on the floor, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had seen death before. She had lost animals before. But something about this shepherd, about the way he had just laid there in the rain, waiting for the world to forget him, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. She reached out, brushing a hand carefully over his bony head. I don't know what happened to you, buddy, she murmured. But you're safe now. No reaction, no flicker of recognition. Just the slow, fragile rise and fall of his chest. Samantha swallowed hard. She had to believe he would make it. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had finally stopped for him. The clinic was quiet. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the soft hum of the IV machine. Samantha sat beside the examination table, her elbows resting on her knees, watching Chance. His breathing had steadied slightly, but he still hadn't moved. Hours had passed since she found him on the road, since she had carried his motionless body through the storm. And yet, despite the fluids, the warmth, the care, he was barely clinging to life. Derek walked back into the room, a clipboard in his hand. His expression was neutral, unreadable. He's stable, he said. For now. Samantha let out a slow breath. But, Derek hesitated. But I don't know if he wants to fight. She turned to him, confused. What do you mean? Derek set the clipboard down and leaned against the counter. I've treated a lot of dogs in bad shape, Sam. Some fight, even when they're at death's door. Others, he glanced at Chance's still form. Others have already given up. Samantha frowned, looking back at the shepherd. Was that what this was? Had he already decided his fate? She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over his ear. He can't just give up, she murmured. Derek sighed. His body is weak, his nerves are damaged, and he's severely malnourished. The odds aren't in his favor. He crossed his arms. We have to ask ourselves, are we keeping him alive because he has a chance, or because we don't want to let go? Samantha's jaw tightened. I won't let him go. Not yet. Derek held her gaze for a moment before nodding. All right, then we need to try something different. The next morning, Samantha arrived early at the clinic. She had barely slept, her mind constantly returning to the German shepherd who refused to move. As she pushed open the door to the exam room, she stopped in her tracks. Chance's eyes were open. For the first time since she found him, he was awake. His gaze was unfocused, distant, but it was there. His body was still weak, still frozen in place, but his eyes followed her as she stepped closer. Samantha's heart pounded. Hey, buddy, she whispered. Chance blinked. She knelt beside him, carefully placing her hand on his paw. It was cold, but not as cold as before. For a long moment, nothing happened. And then, his paw twitched. Just a small, weak movement, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Samantha exhaled shakily, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. He was still fighting. Derek walked in behind her, pausing when he saw the shepherd's open eyes. Samantha glanced back at him. "Still think he's given up?" Derek sighed, then smiled faintly. "All right," he admitted. "Let's see if he's really willing to fight." Samantha sat at her desk, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The clinic was dimly lit, the only sound in the room the soft hum of her computer. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched beside her, long forgotten as she scrolled through missing pet reports, searching, hoping, for any clue about Chance's past, but nothing matched. She rubbed her temples, frustration brewing in her chest. How could a dog like him, clearly once someone's pet, end up abandoned and paralyzed in the middle of a storm? She glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Her mind screamed at her to sleep, but her heart wouldn't let her. Not yet, not when there were still too many unanswered questions. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she sighed and reached for her phone. She pulled up Derek's contact and typed a quick message. "Can you run another scan for a microchip first thing in the morning?" She hesitated, then added, "Something doesn't feel right." She hit send and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The next morning, Samantha walked into the clinic, her coffee half drunk and her eyes red from lack of sleep. Derek was already there, standing beside Chance in the examination room, his face unreadable. "You were right," he said, holding up a scanner. Samantha's heart pounded. Chance had a microchip. Derek handed her a tablet displaying the results. "It's been deactivated, though." Her fingers tightened around the device. Who would deactivate a chip unless they wanted him to never be found? Derek sighed. "That's the real question." Samantha scrolled through the limited data. Most of the information had been erased. The owner's name, contact details, gone. Wiped clean. But one thing remained, his name. His name was already Chance. Samantha murmured. Derek exhaled. Then whoever left him in that storm knew exactly what they were doing. Samantha's chest tightened. Chance hadn't just been lost. He had been erased. Samantha knew she had to dig deeper. She spent the next hour calling local shelters and rescues, asking if anyone remembered a German shepherd named Chance. Most had no record of him. Then, on her third call, an elderly woman answered. "Chance?" The woman hesitated. "I remember a shepherd named Chance, but if it's the same one, he's been gone for years." Samantha's pulse spiked. "Gone? What do you mean?" The woman sighed. "He was brought to our shelter 4 years ago. He was a beautiful dog, strong and healthy, but he didn't stay long." Samantha clenched the phone. "Did someone adopt him?" A long pause. "Yes. A family took him in, but they returned him a few months later. They said he was too much work." Samantha felt her jaw tighten. He had been abandoned once. The woman continued. "Then, someone else took him. A man. But I don't know what happened after that. He never brought Chance back to the shelter." Samantha's breath hitched. That was it. That was all she had. Her eyes flickered to the sleeping dog beside her. He had been loved once, twice even, only to be discarded like trash. Her stomach twisted. And that second owner? He never even reported Chance missing. Did that mean he never wanted him to be found? Derek leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Samantha process the information. "We don't know what happened after that," he said carefully. Samantha's hands curled into fists. "We know enough," she said bitterly. Chance had once had a home, a family, maybe even a warm bed and food in his bowl. But at some point, someone decided he didn't deserve that anymore. She looked at the shepherd lying on the exam table, his thin frame barely rising with each breath. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Whoever left him out there, they didn't just give up on him," she whispered. "They wanted him dead." The words hung in the air, suffocating. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Sam, I know how you feel, but we don't have proof. We have a deactivated microchip." Her voice was cold. "We have a missing history. We have an abandoned dog who didn't get this way overnight." Derek sighed. And we also have a dog who still might not recover. Samantha's stomach clenched. She knew that. She turned back to Chance, placing a hand gently on his bony head. His fur was still too rough, still too thin, but something had changed. His eyes were open. For the first time since she found him, Chance looked at her. It wasn't much, just a flicker of recognition, but it was enough. Samantha's grip on his fur tightened. He still had a fight left in him, and she wasn't going to let him fight alone. Samantha barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Chance lying in the rain, motionless. Just like when she had found him, the weight of what she had discovered pressed heavily on her chest. Someone had abandoned him, erased him from existence, and left him to die. That wasn't just neglect, it was cruelty. When she arrived at the clinic early the next morning, Derek was already there, standing beside Chance's frail body. His expression was unreadable, but the moment she stepped into the room, he looked at her with something different in his eyes. "You need to see this," he said, stepping aside. Samantha's heart pounded as she approached. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it wasn't this. Chance's eyes were open. Not just open, aware. For the first time, there was life behind them. He wasn't just lying there, disconnected from the world. His gaze locked onto hers, and something flickered, something fragile but undeniable. Samantha sucked in a sharp breath. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, kneeling beside him. She reached out, brushing her fingers gently over his head. And then, his tail twitched. It was the faintest movement, barely noticeable, but it happened. Derek exhaled, crossing his arms. "That's the first real response I've seen since you brought him in." Samantha could hardly believe it. He was still here, still holding on. Derek's voice softened. "He's stable, but we have to be realistic. The nerve damage is severe. If he has any chance of walking again, it's going to take time. And even then," he hesitated, "there's no guarantee." Samantha knew that. She had known from the beginning. But she also knew something else. He hadn't given up yet. She spent the rest of the morning by his side. Every few hours she repositioned him, massaged his stiff muscles, and offered him food and water. He still couldn't move his legs, but there was something different in his eyes now. A spark, small, but there. That night, long after the clinic had closed, Samantha sat beside him on the floor, her back against the exam table. The soft glow of the room's nightlight cast long shadows across the walls. The rhythmic hum of the IV pump was the only sound filling the quiet space. Her fingers gently traced over Chance's fur. "You were waiting for someone, weren't you?" she whispered. "All those nights, lying in the rain, you weren't just surviving, you were waiting." Chance's breath was slow and even, but his ears twitched slightly at her voice. She let out a slow breath, running her hand over his bony shoulder. "Well, you don't have to wait anymore." Then, for the first time since she had found him, Chance shifted. It wasn't much, just a slight movement of his head. A tiny adjustment, as if leaning into her touch. Her throat tightened, his tail twitched again, and for the first time, Samantha truly believed he might have a future after all. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the clinic, casting a golden glow over the room. The air felt warmer today, lighter. Samantha sat cross-legged on the floor beside Chance, just like she had done every morning for the past few weeks. But today was different. Today, he was trying to move. It had started small, a flicker of muscle in his back legs, a faint twitch that barely seemed real. Then came the first attempt at lifting his head, shaky and weak, but determined. Samantha had never seen such sheer willpower in an animal before. Now, as she gently massaged his hind legs, she could feel the tension in his muscles. He was still far from strong, but he wasn't lifeless anymore. Derek stood near the doorway, watching in silence. He had been skeptical at first, but even he couldn't deny the change. "He's really fighting," Derek murmured, almost in disbelief. Samantha smiled softly, running a hand over Chance's coarse fur. "Yeah, he is." Chance blinked up at her, his ears twitching as if he could feel the hope in the room. And then, he tried to stand. His front paws pressed into the blanket beneath him, his claws digging in for leverage. His hind legs trembled, struggling to support his weight. For a brief moment, it seemed impossible. His muscles shook and his body wavered, but he didn't stop. Samantha held her breath. Then, his back legs pushed off the ground. It was awkward, unsteady, but he was standing. Samantha's chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat. Derek let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Chance stood there, his legs trembling, his ribs still far too visible. But he was up. He had spent weeks trapped inside his own body, paralyzed, motionless, waiting. Now, he was finally taking back control. Samantha wiped at her eyes, laughing softly. You did it, buddy. Chance let out a slow, deep breath. And then, he took his first step. It was clumsy. His back legs almost buckled beneath him. But he didn't fall. He didn't give up. Samantha reached out to steady him, her touch gentle. One step at a time, she whispered. Chance's tail gave the smallest wag. He was ready. The crisp autumn air was cool but refreshing as Samantha pulled into her driveway. The leaves had begun to turn, painting the neighborhood in shades of orange and gold. In the passenger seat, Chance sat proudly, his fur now thick and shining. He still bore the scars of his past. His ribs weren't as sharp, but they were still faintly visible. His gait was still a little stiff, but he walked. He was alive. As soon as Samantha parked, he perked up, ears forward. The moment she opened the door, he leapt out on his own. She laughed, watching as he trotted across the yard, sniffing the air, taking in the world like he had been given a second chance at life. Because he had. Samantha knelt in the grass, whistling softly. Come here, Chance. He turned, his eyes locking onto hers. And then, for the first time since the night she found him in the rain, he ran. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't perfect, but it was his. He skidded to a stop in front of her, pressing his head against her chest. Samantha wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. She had found him on the edge of death, abandoned and forgotten, but he wasn't forgotten anymore. You're home now, she whispered. Chance let out a contented sigh, his tail wagging slowly. And for the first time, he knew she was right. He was finally home. Chance's story is proof that, even in the darkest moments, hope can still shine through. No animal deserves to be abandoned, and no life should be left behind. If this story moved you, help us spread awareness. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, have you ever rescued an animal? What's their story? We'd love to hear from you.